In this segment, I want to give you a few bits of information to consider as you are approaching the idea of preaching. Before we do that, I want to give you two quick caveats that apply to this online enrichment course. Number one, at the very end of this course, we're going to give you some additional resources, some great books that we believe will be really helpful to you as you seek to develop as a preacher. The second caveat that I think is important to note before we continue that applies to this enrichment course is the fact that I'm going to be mentioning a variety of different preachers and communicators by name. I want to make it very clear that just because I mention a particular preacher or speaker does not necessarily mean that I endorse that preacher's content or theology or ideology, but merely that there is something about their communication style that I think is valuable or important. The reason why I mention that is because there's no doubt everyone watching this comes from different theological backgrounds, different denominational circles, and different theological traditions and heritages. We all have different ideas and different ideologies as we approach the topic of preaching. The goal of this course is not necessarily to get you to embrace one particular theological or ideological framework, but instead really develop a particular attitude when it comes to approaching the scriptures and how to preach them effectively. So with that in mind, let me give you one really important lesson that I learned many years ago when it comes to developing as a preacher. And that is this: very few people are really good at preaching off the bat. Very few people, if anyone, is really great at it the first time up. Some guys are naturally better than others. Some guys and girls are naturally better communicators, naturally better public speakers, naturally have maybe more charisma that lends them to being better communicators or more motivational or more attractive in the way they communicate. We all have different level of skill and talent, but very few people are good immediately, which means to be a great preacher, you just got to get up and preach. As wild as that seems to some, if you got to be good at it, you just got to do it. When I was a young man seeking to develop as a communicator and preacher, I would take every opportunity that I had to speak. I would go to nursing homes. I'd go to elementary schools and want to speak at chapels. I'd speak at small groups, Bible studies. Any opportunity that I could get. If someone was willing to give me 5 minutes to get up and talk about the Bible and talk about the God I love, I would absolutely take the opportunity. In addition to that, I would frequently look for feedback and coaching, get insights from people who are there. A really good friend of mine, one of my colleagues here at Bethany Global University, Kenneth Freire, really taught me this several years ago. He would say to me every single time he does a teaching or speaking of any kind, he would immediately go to people in the audience and go to them and ask them what they thought about it. He would ask specific questions and look for insights. In fact, sometimes before he started speaking or preaching, he would go to people in the audience and say to them, I want you to look out for these specific things. I want you to examine what I'm doing, and I'm going to come up to you afterwards and ask for some insights and ask for some feedback. If you can create a structure where you are getting feedback and insights and coaching, you're going to get much, much better. It is your responsibility to develop as a preacher and become the best communicator that you can possibly be. In fact, when it comes to preaching and communication as a whole, you are responsible to make sure that your words come across in the best fashion, in the most effective and most efficient manner possible. It is not the audience's responsibility to be good listeners. It is your responsibility to be a great communicator. I'm going to finish this segment by giving you a quick story from a few years ago that I think will be helpful to illustrate what I mean by this. Several years ago, I was spending time with my younger sister. She's about 21 years younger than I am. My mother got remarried when I was in high school. We were hanging out. She was about 7 or 8 years old, and I always longed to have a little brother, but I don't have one, so instead I decided to take my little sister out and play catch. So we're playing with a football and tossing it back and forth. And because she's a 7-year-old girl, she's not exactly as athletic as an adult man and doesn't have the wherewithal to do that which I would want her to do. So I have to be cautious in how I throw the ball. If I grab the ball and I throw it at her as if she's an adult man, and I throw it with all my might, it could be the best pass. It could be a perfect spiral. It could be a beautiful pass, but the reality is it's going to hit her right in the head. She's going to drop it. She may end up crying, in fact. You see, it's not about me throwing the ball as best as I could throw it. It's not me trying to be impressive. The goal of the game of catch is to throw the ball in a manner that she can catch it. So I'm not going to throw it the same way as I would throw it to an adult man. See, with my little sister, I would grab the ball and I look at her and say, okay, Alexis, here you go. You ready? I'm going to toss it. 1, 2, 3. And I real lightly and gently just toss it up and she can catch it. That's not necessarily a good pass in the NFL. If I'm playing with a bunch of adult men, that wouldn't be a good pass. You see, the context that I'm in will determine what is a good pass and what is a bad pass. And so frequently, preachers just want to preach in whatever they think is best and whatever style they prefer. And what's happening is you are not taking the context into consideration. When you're developing as a preacher, when you're developing as a communicator, your goal is to do all that you can do to be the best you can be. And you need to do all that you can do and do everything within your power to take the context into consideration, to take your audience into consideration, and make sure you throw your words, metaphorically speaking, right? You're throwing your words at them in a manner that they can catch. You see, it doesn't matter how well you throw the ball if the person you're throwing it to is incapable of catching it. To be a great preacher means that you learn to develop yourself to throw your words, to give them the message in the manner that is ideal for them to be able to catch it, understand it, and digest it. Preaching is not about how good you can talk. Preaching is about how well you can pass concepts so that the person can digest them. That's what being a great preacher really is all about. In the next segment, we're going to talk about this idea of impact preaching, and specifically going to ask the question, how do learning styles impact how we ought to preach?